Hey guys, we're here with Coach Robyn Fralick from Bowling Green. Coach, how you doing today?
Great. Thanks so much for having me today.
Awesome, awesome. So when did you realize coaching was something you wanted to do for the rest of your life?
Um, it's actually interesting you asked that. So I played at Davidson College, and I remember at the end of my senior year walking into the career center and thinking like, oh my gosh, I've got to figure out the next step. And I remember I left the career center and I was actually really interested in working on like a dude ranch for the summer. Those were my big plans, was just go work out in Colorado and kind of probably delay real life. And I ended up getting a marketing internship and did live out in Colorado. And I remember during it, it was a great internship. I lived in a beautiful part of the country. And I remember just like missing basketball so much. So that was probably the first telltale sign for me, was like I had this great opportunity right out of college and I just really missed basketball. And so at the end of that summer, I actually had an opportunity come about at App State to be a third assistant. It was the same league that I had played in. And so that's kind of how it started. But it wasn't something I've always known. It wasn't like this dream of mine since I was little. It was just the passion for basketball was something that I could tell was missing when I didn't have it.
You're a Michigan native.
Yep.
I got folk from Farmington Hills. My dad lives up there.
Okay, nice.
Most dope, most dope. If you were to use one word to describe a Michigan basketball player, what would it be and why?
One word to describe a Michigan basketball player. Tough.
Tough. Okay, okay. All right.
Mm-hmm.
You were quite the player, like you said, fourth all time in assists. When you started coaching, you weren't far removed from your playing days.
Yeah.
What are some of the pros and cons in regards to the style of play from when you played, versus now? Because it's just I would assume it's a totally kind of different game in regards to the speed of things offensively and defensively and things like that. But tell me one thing that comes to mind from when you played.
Well, it's funny. I played 18 years ago, which those memories still feel so present, but it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
The game has really changed, and I think it's become way more skilled. I think the ability to shoot the ball and play in space and play with pace and play out of decision making and concepts has incredibly evolved. I feel like when I played, it was a lot more. It was a lot slower. There's a lot more sets, and I think coaches control. And now I see the game being taught much more at a faster pace and way more skilled. I think the analytics have really changed the game in the last decade of realizing the value of the three-pointer. So I would really have to improve to be a good player nowadays.
If you were to use one word to describe your coaching style, what would it be and why?
Consistent. I think going in day, I've coached great teams. I've coached teams at the bottom of the league. I've coached competitive teams. I feel like I've kind of coached on all spectrums. But I feel like I show up consistently, just the way we practice, the lessons, the things that I preach. Our players know who they're getting day in and day out.
You mentioned earlier you got your first coaching experience at Appalachian State.
Yeah.
You weren't far removed from your playing days. Tell me about your time there. Was it hard coaching kids that you were so close to in age and things like that? Was that a process for you or a process for them? So just tell me about that time.
Probably both. And what was interesting is that a lot of the players I had competed against because we were in the same league. So I always think that's a bridge you learn as a coach when you're so close to the players. How do you, the advantages is that you're connected. You really understand, I think, the emotional continuum of being a player. I just feel like you're still so close to that, so you can relate. I think the challenge is then seeing you as a coach, seeing you as a person of of influence but I think that that's a really important piece. Like, I think when you can still play and you can relate, I think that that role on a team is critical. I think when kids feel connected. So, what I learned during that time was sort of, how do you bridge that? How do you use my age as an advantage, but also learn and mature, because that was my first year coaching. So I had a million things to learn. But one of the things that I could bring, I could help, I could play, I could be on the court, I could bring that to like individual workouts and practice.
Mhm. Let me know if I'm incorrect, but you're a part of the BDS agency, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So most people don't know that coaches, assistant coaches, and things like that do have agents.
Yeah.
Tell me about why you decided to work with Brian, why, it was the right fit, and some of the things that having an agent helps you navigate throughout your career.
Well, Brian's awesome. He's been really good to me and my family. And when I was the head coach at Ashland, I remember he connected with me. And at that time, I'm like, why would I need an agent? My contract as Division II head coach was very simple. But it was more about creating that relationship for what could possibly happen in the future. And when I got the Bowling Green job, he's just, it's not a world I know. I don't really understand contracts and getting access to all, because it's so important when you become a head coach or an assistant. I mean, there's a lot of contracts that go into the coaching world, that you have somebody to help you. I mean, benchmarks and who has access to information. And if you're going to negotiate, you need facts. You need to be able to go in with, this is why, this is what it should be. And having someone like Brian, he's so good at it, and he's worked, and your AD is your boss, and they're great. But when you start getting into negotiations, that can be really tricky. You don't want to, both sides, you don't want to feel like that is kind of putting any sort of barrier in your relationship. And so bringing someone in else who kind of does that middle work, it's kind of like an agent, when you buy a house, and they're able to sort of understand both sides and help both sides get to an agreement.
Awesome. You then went on to become the Dobo at Western Michigan.
Yeah.
Okay, so a lot of people don't know how tough the Dobo job can be. There's lots of heavy lifting.
Yeah.
The planes, the hotels, the food, and it's not a lot of pats on the backs and thank you very muches and things like that. And if one thing goes wrong, you're on the line. One thing can set the whole trip off. How did that job prepare you for the next step in your career?
Well, interestingly, when I was the Dobo at Western, it wasn't a typical Dobo. It was more of a graduate assistant position. So I didn't have, because I know what our director of basketball ops does, and I didn't have all those duties, but I was in charge of a lot of logistics, like post-game meals and newsletter and alumni connection. And so I'd say it was like a modified version of a director of basketball ops, because I was also a full-time graduate student. But it definitely gave me a feel for how important the aspects off the court are for a team as well. And I was really fortunate to be able to get my master's during that time too.
Sorry, I hit the button by mistake.
You're fine.
Matter of fact, tell me one of your favorite books you read that has helped shape you in the coaching world.
Trying to think of one that really stands out. I read Brad Stevens' book a while ago. I forget what it's called now, but I really connected to it. I feel like I've always sort of admired the way he approaches things, like his just sort of consistency. I've just always kind of from afar watched him never seem too high or too low. I can't remember what it was called. And then I also I love the book, same thing, I can't remember the title, Bill Belichick's kind of tracks his coaching career.
Okay.
So those are two that stand. I love reading.
Mhm.
I love documentaries. I love facts. Like I love reading about people.
Mhm.
I think that, you know, when I'm going to read, we just actually got back from Disney, and Disney is like so imaginative and fun. And I'm like, maybe I should read a little more fiction, but I've been always way more drawn to facts.
Mhm. Mhm. Your next step in your career was assistant coach at Toledo, correct?
Yep.
Tell me about your time there.
So I was an assistant coach for Mark Elin, who at the time was the winningest coach in MAC history. He had a ton of success. Toledo is a program that has had a lot of tradition. So I felt really fortunate to get that opportunity. And what was really great about that is the friendship and connection that Coach Elin and I were able to form. We're still really close and connected to this day. And I learned a lot from him. You know, it was an interesting season because he resigned at the end of the year. So I was with him for 1 year, and he actually resigned maybe a month before the season ended.
Mhm.
And so to go through something like that with a coach and just be sort of in like a last year transitional year was eye-opening. But I was really taken by how the team really rallied around him. You know, after he had made the announcement that this was going to be his last season, we had this great run in the MAC tournament, and I just saw a bunch of people really drawn to him, and I admired he treated people so well. You know, even through a really personally tough time, he treated his staff and his team really well.
Mhm. Mhm. So you become the assistant at Ashland. Um, Someone told me when I was young, you must master the art of following before you can lead.
Yeah.
You are a part of a staff that reached high honors. You went to the chip, you won a chip back-to-back years. Um, Tell me about the secret sauce. How do you build that program to that level of success?
Well, Ashland, I had no idea where it was when I ended up working there. So Coach Ramsey, who was my boss, I was her assistant for 7 years, called me, you know, when Coach Elin resigned from Toledo. And I was like, and I literally had I had no idea about where it was, anything about Ashland. And I remember when I went on my interview, I'm like, I mean, it's kind of in the middle, of nowhere. I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, and now that I look back and it's just like, oh gosh, like my whole life changed there. Actually, my husband was the men's assistant coach, so that's where we met. We got married there. We had our 2 kids there. You know, I got to coach these crazy elite teams. So looking back, I'm like, never in my wildest dreams did I think I live in Ashland, Ohio. And then, you know, all of these beautiful blessings of my life happened there. But yeah, I got there. Coach Ramsey, you know, she's a Hall of Famer, and I think I just when you're Division II assistant, it's just really the 2 of you. So you got to learn to do a lot, you know, and you kind of get some room to make mistakes and figure stuff out. And you know, there's 2 of you, and you're in charge of a lot. So that responsibility that young really helped me grow as a coach. It really helped me learn how to teach and be in charge of things and learn how to understand systems, offensive, defensive practice, recruiting. You know, we didn't have 10 people that needed to agree on something. It was just the 2 of us. So I love that. I feel so fortunate that I coached at that level for so long, because I think you really learn how to coach, and you really learn how to make a lot out of not having a lot. And I also think you coach kids who are really grateful, because we don't, you know, they don't get a million frills. So I was her assistant for 7 years. We just kind of, there was nothing magic to it. We just kind of kept doing making good decisions day after day. And if you keep stacking good decisions day after day over time, suddenly you can have a great team. You know, you keep making the right decisions about who you recruit. You keep making the right decisions about your off-season training, your practices. All of a sudden, you have a great team. So we did some really good recruiting. We got some great players. We got really fortunate with some really good transfers. And then we were really intentional about the culture, about who we were and what we were about, and people were drawn to that. And so, when that happens, you can keep it going.
Mhm. You then go on to be the head coach at Ashland.
Yeah.
Reflecting and looking back, you really helped the build of Ashland. Then you become the head coach. What was harder to you, the build up, the rise to the mountaintop, or staying there? Because like sustained success is also a process as well. So just tell me about that.
Both. They're both really hard. Building's really hard. Getting to the top is really hard, period. Staying at the top is a different challenge, but they're both really challenging. But what I will say, once you get the breakthrough to get to the top, then you have that to show for. You're not just selling a vision, right? You're not just selling what you believe you can do. You're able to say, hey, this is what we can do. This is what we are doing, come be part of it. So really different. I've been part of both. Building it is, there's just this sort of, there's a fatigue to that. Maintaining it is, okay, how do you keep people engaged at a high level to keep falling in love with doing the right things over and over and over again. So I don't know if one's harder than the other. I think they're both really challenging. But I do know once you have a program that's really clear what you're about, it's really clear the way you play, it's really clear what your culture is about, the right kids are consistently attracted to that as well.
So a lot of people don't know, like, I've coached at D3 level, I've done stuff at the D2 level. There are some really, really good Division II schools, like any 10 conference is really, really good.
Oh yeah.
And there are some D2 schools that can consistently beat Division I schools. Like not like, hey, we'll beat them. We'll beat them. So you're at the top of the mountaintop. You're in a chip. You won a chip. You're 37-2, 37-0, 35. Like you're at that peak level.
Yeah.
Near the end of your tenure there, I'm assuming that you probably tried to play Division I schools whenever you could get a chance to.
Yeah.
An honest question.
Yeah.
Were coaches dodging the work? Were they trying to get around from playing you and stuff like that? Were you reaching out to people and people were like, I don't know about that one. Were you trying to play a good amount of Division I schools? So that's something that one of the things you would tell recruits potentially. Yeah, we're gonna play at least 2 or 3 Division I schools every year. So just tell me the honest truth about that.
Yeah, well, we typically tried to play 1 or 2 in an exhibition. And that would be 1 for the competition, but 2 to fundraise a little bit for the program. That was always a great fundraiser. It got more challenging. It did get more challenging when we won the national championship in 2013. We beat Dayton that year in an exhibition game on a buzzer beater, and they actually went on to the Sweet 16 that season. We played Ohio State to a 5-point game. We beat Bowling Green in an exhibition. So when you start having that sort of success, it definitely can become more challenging to be able to schedule those games. But we played UConn. We went out after we won the national championship in 2017. That next year we drove out and we played UConn. And I think we were down 10-0 in like the first minute and a half. And I'm thinking, who thought this was a good idea? But we hung in there. They played their second group the second half, and it was but what a cool experience for our team. We got to tour around UConn and get a whole, and it's a place where they love women's basketball. So we were always up for those challenges. I always try to find ways to, how can we make a great student athlete experience? What are things that are going to be memorable for them? So we did go seeking that.
3,456 points. Most points Division II school in history. When I used to coach EYBL, I would talk to my kids and, I would say things like, ask them how they wanted to play. And everybody says they want to play fast.
Yeah.
Until it's time to do the work to sustain success at playing fast. So you want to excel at anything you do. What did you guys do? They made you so dynamic and efficient offensively in transition and in the half court.
Well, we matched our style of play. So we played just as fast offensively as we did defensively. We full court pressed. Um, so we wanted to be able to maintain the tempo of the game. And I think you can only do that if you match speed on both sides of the ball. Now, granted, with the shot clock, very different than high school. I think in high school, you have to do that. The shot clock does always create some consistent pace to our game. But we pressed. So we pressed and we just worked on what we did all the time. So it wasn't like, would we prepare for opponents? Yes. But we spent 90% of the year doing what we did. So when you get really, really good at what you do, and you have good players, what the other team does becomes a little bit less important. So I think the trick to that team is that it was what we did all the time. It's how we practiced. It's how we played. Everything we did had pace. Everything we did incorporated our press and our offense. Our offense was simple. It was interchangeable. So there wasn't like stopping or thinking, or I got to get here, I got to get there. There was a real fluidness to the interchangeability of how we played. But I think anytime you can create just automatic responses where kids aren't like, they just know, right? They're not like pausing or wondering, or they're not frozen. You're able to create really a fluid system. And so I think that year, I think we scored, I think it was like 22 to 25 points per game off turnovers. So when your defense is creating that much offense and your offense is that efficient, you're able to score a lot of points.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You didn't go on to become the head coach at Bowling Green. What made this school the right fit at this point in your career?
Well, there's a lot of factors. The MAC is a great league. Bowling Green had an incredible tradition. They'd had some down years, but before that, they had been dominant. So we have a wonderful fan base because there has been so much tradition of great women's basketball. It was an area that I was really comfortable recruiting. I'd been in Ohio for 10 years, so it was a region that I felt confident being able to go in and find the right players. And then it was closer to all of my family. So my husband's from Detroit. He actually went to Troy. I know you said Farmington Hills earlier. So we were basically moving to Bowling Green also put us within about an hour and a half of all of our family. And we've got an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old. And so all of those things, it was a good job decision, but more importantly, it was a good life decision.
You have 5 core values: be a good teammate, manners matter, trust, toughness, and commitment. We could spend time on all of them.
Yeah.
But I want to know what commitment looks like to you on your team, and what do you mean by manners matter?
Yeah. Well, commitment's the center of it, right? I mean, I love that quote about commitment. What is it? Like, commitment is doing what you said you were going to do long after the feeling has passed, right? Like you gotta show up on good days. You got to show up on days you don't feel as good. You got to show up on happy days, hard days. So we talk a lot about being an everyday player, being an every possession player. And to me, that takes a commitment, right? Do you just shoot after you've not shot well, or do you shoot every day, right? Do you go to class occasionally? Like we talk about it in the classroom, on the court, in the community. And it's an everyday thing. It's like falling in love with the endless nature of what it takes. So for us, that's commitment, but it's in all 3 areas. I believe, like, very rarely have I seen somebody who's not serious about school who's a high level player. Like, I just think that commitment piece interweaves through your life. And then manners matter. We talk a lot about playing gratitude. Like, I just feel like at the level we're at, we get a lot of great things. We play high level basketball, we get to travel, we get to stay at great places. We just get so many opportunities, and we want to make sure that our kids understand that. This isn't like how this happens, being grateful for that, being grateful for the opportunity to play basketball. Because I find that when kids are grateful, they have way better experience. When kids are entitled, they typically don't make it. There's just always something else they think they need. So that's the bigger part of manners matter. But the smaller part is every day we're in shared space. So are you mindful of the people who work in our facility, of our equipment, our facility manager, our, the men's team, the volleyball team? Like, I want to make sure that our kids, when we travel, when we're staying at hotels, when we're eating at restaurants, I want to make sure they're really cognizant of other people.
Coach?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can't see it. Okay, here we go. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
A lot of people don't know how rigorous the interview process can be. Can you tell me some of the hardest questions it was for you to answer? When you go into an assistant coaching process or a head coaching process, because normally people come in with the packet and things like that, and
Yeah.
your mission statement, things like that. Just real quickly, just name 1 or 2 that really you're like, oh, that was a good question. I didn't see that one coming.
Trying to think. I think one that I remember stood out is like, what's the most challenging situation you've had and how do you handle it? I always think that is an interesting question. And then as an assistant, I know I once was asked about, like, if you find out players missed curfew, how are you going to tell the head coach? And I remember feeling sort of trapped, like, do you want, I don't know the head coach at this time. Like, is that something you'd want to know? Is that something you don't want to know? So I remember that was an interesting question, because in my head, I'm like, the first person I would tell would be the head coach, and then it's sort of their space to kind of vet how they want to handle it. But I remember feeling like, oh no, is this a trick question? But I think anything dealing with discipline or behavior, because people, in my opinion, are pretty different on that, where they fall on the spectrum of how they handle things. So kind of having a way to answer that without maybe, eliminating yourself with an answer.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's easy to talk about the good. For a second, let's talk about a rough patch.
Yeah.
Tell me a low point in your coaching career and how you handled that situation. Because it can be many different things in regards to a rough patch. Pay, players, administration.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me one thing that was really challenging to you.
I think of a really challenging part of my coaching was my first year as a head coach. We had a really good season, but I remember going into the NCAA tournament, we got upset in the second round. But my team was real disconnected. Like, I could feel it at the end of the season. Like, we were still finding ways to win games, but we were not playing at a high level, in a really important time in March basketball. And I remember at the shoot around before that game, when we got upset, there was just this real disconnection of players who weren't playing, kind of interfering with the team, kind of their discontentment was creating this really strange spirit around our team. And I remember, for me, that was a really important lesson, because you've got to get in front of that. I think I had never gotten in front of it during the season. And all of a sudden at the end of the year, it got in the way of our team being able to maximize our ability. And I took a lot of responsibility for that. And I remember that off season, I just did a lot of reflection. And, since then, I've always tried to be better at getting in front of something that starts small, never stays small. And I let something that started small sort of overtake the spirit of our team. So that was a good lesson learned.
Mm-hmm. 2 more questions, Coach. I know you have to go. Okay.
Yeah, no, good.
So you can only be great at one. You're great with X's and O's, sideline out of bounds, players getting loose, they get in the basket, they're getting a good look. But in regards to the pregame speeches, motivating the troops, things like that, you're kind of like, you're not really that guy. Or do you want to be the coach? You're the Coach Carter. You're the person that the players want to run through a brick wall for. But, we need a quick one. You're under the rim. You're kind of just like rah, but you're not really giving the answers to the questions. Choose one.
Well, I think both are important. I actually think you need both to be be successful. And I think you can have a staff to help with all that. But I will say, I just think the spirit of a team is what makes a team special. You can run all the best plays, but if kids don't stay locked in and play hard for each other and play together, I think of in our league, the teams that are hardest to guard are really good at the things you can't scout, toughness, togetherness. So I would go with creating a team spirit.
Mhm. When you see Bowling Green play, what can we expect to see? Not the wins or the losses, but if I come to a game and I'm walking out the gym, I should be thinking what?
That team has a lot of fun, and that team plays really together.
Mhm, mhm. Okay.
Mhm.
Anything I missed you want to share?
I don't think so.
That's your way of saying he asked a lot of
No,
questions.
I feel like, you got a lot of the life scoop.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Coach. I really appreciate you taking your time out. And you have a good day.
Yeah, you too. Thanks so much for letting me share.